Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Haze, and in today's video, you guys have been asking me to post some Frosty K PvE content. Now, as you guys know, I've been doing a lot of PvP as I really do enjoy this bursty season that we're currently in, but I definitely have been doing some PvE and stuff on the side. The majority of the time, I am actually playing tank as I'm the main tank in my guild, and also I usually tank dungeons and stuff like that, dealing quite a bit of DPS and also having fairly good survival as long as you're kiting out after your cooldowns go down. But anyways, in this video, we're going to be talking about Frosty K dual wield PvE and Mythic Plus, and not only discussing what to do and discussing why, because I feel like a lot of Frosty Ks that I talk to kind of understand what they're doing, but they don't really understand why they're doing it. So in this video, we're going to go into specific details and talk about this. So let's go ahead and do this. So starting off, you're probably wondering, do I want to use a two-hander or do I want to dual wield for PvE? Now specifically, you want to dual wield for PvE, and it's not going to make a lot of sense up front, but just understand that dual wield at the moment with one-handers deals more overall DPS than two-handers, being that when you actually stack critical strike, two weapons auto-attacking and crits on those will grant you killing machine, which will make you deal overall more DPS in the long run, and obviously running a two-hander and having less uptime and less killing machine procs over time. Not to mention, with this build specifically, having Razor Ice on your weapon will increase your DPS a little bit more, since you're not necessarily relying on that big obliteration burst, because in PvE at the moment we're running a breath build, which personally, if you want to run obliteration, you're going to see about I'd say about 1 to 400 DPS difference, considering how good your weapons are. But overall, it definitely is weaker in Mythic Plus situations, and realistically, kind of how low Frosty K DPS is in comparison to other classes, you most likely are going to want to maximize your DPS as much as possible in Mythic Plus situations if you want to push the highest keys possible. So going over talents for Frosty K PvE, we're going to start off with level 15. We're going to be using Cold Heart. Now, being that we have a lot of crit, we generally try to crit our Cold Heart during our burst, dealing maximum pressure, increasing our overall single target. And since Frosty K lacks a bit of single target in comparison to a lot of the other classes in game, especially when you start looking at, let's say, raid DPS. Now, as for the level 25 talents, we're going to be using Runic Attenuation, just because Runic Power Gain, as you can see down there in the level 50 slot, we're running Breath, and that is going to directly support that overall with your single target and or cleave during the Mythic Plus situations. Now, as for the level 30 talents, we're going to be using Blinding Sleet. That's going to give you an AoE interrupt to blind all the targets to get them to stop casting. Very effective, especially for, let's say, like Necrotic Wake, when you have like 4 ads casting Necrotic Bolts. That right there can be a big savior during that. So definitely stick with Blinding Sleet for PvE at the moment, because kicks, especially during Fortified Week, seem to be extremely important. Now, I would know, because obviously I'm tanking, and I take those blasts to the face when people don't kick them, and it's not very fun. Now, as for the level 35 talents, you can either run Avalanche for a little bit more burst pressure, or you can run Frozen Pulse. But personally, I don't necessarily get a lot of downtime with this spec. I mean, I do here and there, but it's not necessarily enough that I'm really getting a lot of benefit from Frozen Pulse. And also being that I get a free Howling Blast, obviously from the legendary belt, that when you hit Remorseless Winter on 3 or more targets, you gain Rhyme proc, which is the Howling Blast proc, and also I get one from using Abomination's Limb, so I generally get a lot of Howling Blast procs in my Mythic Pluses. So I generally get a lot of damage out of Avalanche, quite a bit more than Frozen Pulse. As for the level 40 talents, I'm going to be running Wraith Walk, just because it's going to give me a little bit more ability to keep up with the group, because obviously Frosty K's kind of struggle with that a bit, and if you find yourself being slow in some kind of mechanic on a boss, generally your Wraith Walk is going to be able to, give you that little boost to, let's say, pick up orbs in Sanguine Depths before the explosion goes off and kills you, because you only picked up 1 or 2 orbs instead of 3 or 4. As for the level 45 talent, now this one's very much key in PvE. You want to be using Gathering Storms. Now, if you saw just a couple seconds ago that we're using the legendary belt, that is going to become key. Each rune spent during Remorseless Winter increases its damage by 10% and extends its duration by 0.5 seconds. It is literally the bread and butter of Frosty K Mythic Plus PvE in this situation. It does an insane amount of pressure over time in Mythic Plus, and just a ridiculous amount of consistent AoE pressure, and that's really what we're going to be relying on while using the dual wield spec in comparison to, let's say, the obliteration spec. And the obliteration spec actually takes away from this ability and how much damage it's going to deal overall, and that's the reason why in the level 50 slot we're using Breath of Sindragosa over obliteration. Now, two-hander will give you a little bit more burst pressure, and that is obviously the reason why we use two-hander in PvP than we use dual wield. But dual wield is obviously going to be the better spec when it comes to overall longevity, and I believe that's what the devs intended these two builds to be. So real quick, we need to talk about stat priority here on the dual wield Frost DK. Now, one of the things that's extremely important for PvE is critical strike, being that your auto attacks are going to generate killing machine, which is going to give you a lot of consistency in comparison to not having crit at all, and it's also going to cause your remorseless winters to crit, which they become a very large part of your damage later on. Now obviously crit and mastery are going to be the two most important stats, being that if you don't have any crit, your cleave damage is most likely going to be kind of low for your overall consistency, and if you don't have mastery, your single target and of course your burst pressure is going to be even lower. Now don't kind of hate on haste, even though it is the worst out of the two stats, but haste is also very strong when it comes to playing a Frost Decay. You will need haste in the future, definitely, as 11% probably is fairly close to the amount of haste I probably want. I might want more if I was doing like raiding or single target, but overall just dump a ton of crit in, dump a ton of mastery in, and you should be fairly okay for your overall DPS, being that the majority of your damage comes from Gathering Storms, and of course the Gathering Storms belt. Now obviously this legendary right here is the best for Mythic Plus because it's going to give you the best overall cleave, and that's the reason we're kind of not running the Obliteration build, as during the point that you get the talent and then you get the belt, you'll start noticing that using, let's say, Frost Strikes to generate Obliteration procs to lay out big Obliteration crits is going to give you less DPS than just dumping all of your runes into Remorseless Winter. Now, the other thing that's going to have a big effect on this is Soul Binds. Now, Soul Binds over here, we're going to go ahead and pop this up with Emny. Now, over here with Emny, we've got Everfrost. This is probably one of the biggest, most important things you could have, is Remorseless Winter deals 4.2% damage increased, damage to enemies hit stacking up to 10 times, which obviously is going to stack up to 40%, which is a massive amount of Remorseless Winter damage. That's giving you more damage than you're going to get on your belt, and of course, just straight up, it's going to give you almost as much damage as your talent is going to do for Remorseless Winter. So as you can see with this build, we are just trying to steroid the living crud out of our melee constant DPS with our crits, with our killing machine procs, and we're dumping as much runes into our Remorseless Winters as possible to try to maximize damage. Now obviously crit's going to have a huge effect in that, being that we want to be hitting 4 or more targets with that Remorseless Winter to maximize the damage on it. And obviously, Critical Strike is going to affect that, and of course the Mastery is going to have a big effect on how much damage that Remorseless Winter is currently doing. So when talking about the overall rotation here, what we really want to do, and kind of our main goal, is to dump as many runes into Remorseless Winter as possible, as we're using the Legendary, the Conduit, and obviously the talent to make Legendary a steroided out ability, kind of like running triple trait in BFA when we had the Remorseless Winter damage. So what we're going to go ahead and do on this target for Burst is, obviously, if we are not using Breath, so this time we're not going to use Breath, we'll show that lined up in just a minute. What I'm going to do, obviously, is run in on the target, hit a pre-Remorseless Winter, pop my pillar, use my trinket, and then I'm just going to lay in Obliterates on the target. If you get a Howling Blast proc, use that. Obviously, when you're using this legendary belt, it is going to guarantee a Howling Blast proc off the opener, so use that generally within that second Obliterate to put your dots on the target, and it's going to deal obviously a lot of damage within that Howling Blast. Now, being that you did that, you're just going to go back to spamming on those Obliterates. You get a Killing Machine proc, just throw that in there. You really won't notice that they're happening. You'll just kind of throw them in there. They'll be a big crit. Heck yeah, big DPS gain. It'll be cool. But your main goal, obviously, is to sink runes into that Remorseless Winter to increase your overall single target pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and open up on this. I'm not going to use Remorseless Winter. I could, yeah, I'll go ahead and throw an A-Bomb Limb. Now, A-Bomb Limb is kind of interesting with Necrolord, being that it does grant you a Howling Blast proc, so I kind of weave that in a little bit afterwards, being that I don't really want to waste that HB proc, as it does give me quite a bit of burst pressure. Now, when going in on the target, I'm going to go ahead and pop Pillar and obviously Remorseless Winter, and I'm just going to start dumping as many runes as I can. Now, I did get that proc fairly quick, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. Now, I'm just dumping as many runes as possible in. Now, we aren't getting very many procs, and we're not going to go ahead and throw up our Grippy Limb, so we're just going to go ahead and keep dumping in those runes into our Remorseless Winter. As you can see, we're dealing quite a bit of cleave damage on these 4 targets, and you really just want to kind of rotate this over and over and over again as you're DPSing on targets. Now, Remorseless Winter came back up. I didn't hit it instantly, but you want to hit that instantly. It is so important to use that Remorseless Winter damage to pump runes into your overall rotation. Now, we can go ahead and look at our recount over here, and our Remorseless Winter obviously is dealing, you know, like 36% of our damage, which is a big majority of Frosty Cake cleaving ability, as you can see. Now, that's kind of like the bread and butter. As you saw, we have 19% crit, so getting 20 crits out of 100 Remorseless Winter is fairly accurate, and that's really how you keep up the overall rotation, your overall DPS on a Frost DK in a Mythic Plus scenario. Now let's say you want to go a little bigger, you want to throw in breath, you want to go big ham, you want to go big damage, you want to just pump out a massive amount of cleave as possible. Obviously we're going to insert our dragon, we're going to insert our breath, and we're really just going to start pumping that AoE cleave, and it can actually get pretty high on a Frost DK, like the sheer amount of burst cleave you can do against AoE targets. So we're going to go ahead and kind of pop off on this situation. Now, you're doing literally the same exact thing as you were doing before. Realistically, the only difference is you're pulling your runic power so you can get breath and power off, and that's going to make you obviously deal a lot more AoE consistency, being that you got Remorseless Winter pumping and you've got Breath of Sindragoza doing, which is going to make it massive amounts of damage. Now if you are going to throw breath, you do want to prolong your pillar just by a little bit, being that breath is going to overtake your Remorseless Winter damage during this burst window. So let's go ahead and open up on the target here and show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. Now you're going to open up almost the same way. You're not going to throw pillar yet, being that you do want to use it with your breath. Now I am going to quick burst breath here and go ahead and throw up my grippy hands, and I'm just going to keep sinking runes into both of these abilities and generating as much runic power as possible for a nice quick burst. Pillar's about to come to an end. I'm going to throw a big dragon for 20 plus Ks, and our DPS is just going to skyrocket, you know, massive amounts. Huge amounts. Now obviously we're running Necrolord, so our breath is going to be a lot shorter than, let's say, Venthyr or Kyrion's going to have a little bit more burst pressure, being that they are mastery based, but we do get quite a bit of strength off of our grippy hands, and of course it's going to benefit the other people in the group quite a bit for that too. Now outside of burst, I'm just going to be generating some frost strikes to get my Remorseless Winter back up, and then again we're just going to start sinking more runes back into that overall rotation, and generally just trying to cleave as much burst pressure as we can with those Remorseless Winters again, just trying to keep up that constant damage. As you can see here, my Froststorm's Fury is extremely high, my Remorseless Winter's extremely high. During the burst pressure, breath was definitely doing more damage, but being that we're outside of that burst window, you can definitely see that Remorseless Winter is even overtaking some of our biggest burst pressuring abilities that are hitting for, you know, 20 to 22k. And that's how you keep up that big overall consistency in those Mythic Plus dungeons. Now you want to try and rotate those cooldowns as much as possible. Obviously you can even use your Ghoul Sank if you're really starved on, let's say, runes or something, but one of the other things you definitely want to do is have a bit of runes when you throw up your Remorseless Winter, because pumping those runes into there is extremely important. You really do need those runes, otherwise it will feel like a bit of a wasted Remorseless Winter overall. So let's go ahead and talk about single target pressure. As we did, it's pretty much the same thing as we did on the cleave, like setting up for the breath. It's the same kind of setup, just overall it's, you know, less targets. So what we're going to go ahead and do is go in on the target, obviously throw up our Ghoul. We're going to go ahead and throw up our Remorseless Winter, obliterate the target a couple times to generate some runic power, and then we're going to go ahead and Abomination Limb into Pillar, Empower Rune Weapon, and go ahead and hit Breath to just start off that big breath damage, that big breath burst, and just try to keep that up as long as possible. That's kind of where like your bread and butter for that single target burst cleave comes with. And of course, either when you have cooldown procs or the end of your Pillar when you have maximized strength gain from your Pillar, you're going to go ahead and throw out your Dragon and of course Chains of Ice to get your full benefit from Cold Heart. And if either of those crit, your single target DPS is going to actually like jump through the roof, and if it doesn't crit, it's going to be fairly mediocre on a Frost DK, at least off the opener. So what we're going to go ahead and do, obviously, like I just said, is we're going to summon up our Ghoul. We're going to go ahead and Remorseless Winter, go in on the target, hit him with a couple big obliterates, and at this point, once we got a bit of runic power, we're going to throw up our Grippy Hands, our Empower, and go in with Breath to really just maximize that pressure. Now, we really don't want to overcap on a lot of runic power, being that it will hurt us later on. Now we're going to go ahead and throw up our Chains and our Dragon's Burst and just kind of keep up our breath here still for just as long as possible. On down, do we want to use Remorseless Winter if it comes back up? Obviously we do, as we know Remorseless Winter is our bread and butter. Now you can see their breath fell off, and we're just going to kind of continue that overall rotation we just had, kind of relying on Cold Heart. Now we do want to wait until stacks come back before you hit your Cold Heart again, because if you're using that early, it's obviously going to be a fairly big DPS loss. Now you really do just want to try and time it with Pillar as much as possible. Necessarily 20 stacks aren't necessarily as important, but most likely during your next Pillar you will have 20 stacks by the time that thing comes back up for that secondary burst on the target, and that's how you kind of do the overall rotation on the Frost DK. Now the nice thing about your breath spec is it is going to scale heavily when it comes to somebody popping, let's say, popping Lust, you're going to deal a lot more DPS overall with Lust popping, being that you will have a lot more haste, and that'll give you a lot more runes to sit there and pump out more runic power to advance on your breath, and that will allow you to pop your empowered rune weapon a little bit later, obviously if you are running breath in that single target scenario with that Lust. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to do a quick Mythic Plus guide for you guys for this Frosty K DPS that you guys have been asking for some PvE stuff here on the channel. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did. Leave any comments if you have any questions about different builds, different PvE specs. I'll go ahead and talk to you guys about that. And of course, until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.